This month on the Open Apple podcast,
there's some people that bought my boards and are searching around the world, literally around the world, and finding date code correct components that would have been the same year manufacturer components that were on the original Apple-1. It's really wild.
All that and more. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Open Apple podcast, where we celebrate the Apple II. Whether you're a longtime user, a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community, join us as we share news and memories of Steve Wozniak's most famous personal computer.
Welcome to the Open Apple podcast. This is show number 29 for July 2013. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, KansasFest is just around the corner, but in the meantime, we're here to entertain you with more Apple II news, views, and pretty much anything else we can think of. I am Mike McGinnis, and I'm here with my co-host, as I am every month, Ken Gagney. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, and I recommend that anybody who's going to KansasFest download this episode as well as our exhaustive back catalog of episodes and listen to all of them to get you into the mood for the world's premier Apple II convention.
That's right. You need to sit in your living room and listen to them one at a time. Don't get up. Don't get food. Don't go to the bathroom. Just what are we at, like 45 or 50 hours of programming?
Well, you know, we have at least one listener who... I think this is one of the only podcasts he listens to. He's very dedicated to the audio arts and wants to consume it in just the right context. So when he's listening to our podcast, this is actually the only thing he's doing.
Wow.
He's not doing the dishes, he's not cooking, he's not driving to work, he's not going for a jog. He sits back and listens to our show, which in my opinion is the way it should be consumed, because otherwise you're just missing out on all the nuances that really put our podcast above and beyond anything else you can find on the internet.
It's true. The quality of the programming that you find here is head and shoulders above everything else out there.
Everything. Yes.
Or at least that's what I like to tell people.
We do have people who don't listen to podcasts regularly, but
What?
then when they're driving across Kansas or coming down from Chicago to KansasFest, they have nothing else to do, so they do load up on Open Apple, and they consume multiple hours of shows. A couple of years ago, I drove to Denver from Boston with Juice GS Associate Editor Andy Malloy, and we listened to about 7 episodes of Open Apple, not because I hadn't already heard them, and not because I loved the sound of my own voice, but because he had fallen a little bit behind, and I thought that'd be a good opportunity to force him to catch up.
And how did we sound, Ken?
Delightful.
Of course.
Yes. Thanks primarily to the voice masking that we do. Yeah, without the voice masking, I actually sound like Gilbert Gottfried, and people are really surprised to find that out when they show up at KansasFest. But Open Apple, yeah, I can sound however I want.
True. Yep.
Yeah. So how are you this month, Mike?
Doing well, Ken. And you?
Good. As you may recall, our last episode that we recorded with Lon was the night before the movers came and took all my furniture.
Yes.
They did give it back to me in a new home, which I'm a terrible unpacker. I'm looking at a room of about a dozen boxes right now that haven't changed in the month that I've been here. But I do love the new location. The commute to work has gone from a 90-minute train ride to a 30-minute bicycle ride, and I love starting my day on the bicycle. It is just a fantastic start to my day.
It sounds like a definite step up in your situation, so we're all happy for you.
Thank you. Yeah, so is my chiropractor. I saw him yesterday, and he said, wow, your back is much better than the last time I saw you. Are you doing something differently? I'm like, yeah, I'm bicycling like a dozen miles every day, and, you know, a dozen by itself may not be much, but 5 times a week, it really adds up.
I imagine it has some really great health benefits.
Yeah, and also I have not put any gasoline in my car in the last 3.5 weeks.
Yeah, but you drive a Prius. It's not like you fill that thing up regularly anyway.
I used to fill it up maybe once every 10 days or so.
Wow, that's a lot of driving.
Yeah, I met somebody recently who has the same year car I do, but she has 20% of the miles I do. I have 125,000 miles, and she has 25,000 miles.
Wow.
And we both bought our Priuses 6 years ago.
Well, I'm glad things are working out in your new place.
Yeah, me too. I have not changed my office at MIT, which is where my Apple II is, so that has been a constant, and I still have access to all my retro computing stuff there. And what about you? You still have your exhaustive Apple II collection?
I'm slowly whittling away at it, but I do. Yeah, I think that I've reached the conclusion that it's probably better to have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 items that are in really great shape and that I care about and put a lot of effort into than a storage unit full of 20 or 50 or 100 of these things. So I'm slowly reducing my collection, and that's been going okay.
Yeah, I remember reading on your blog about how the visit to Pinball Wizard versus Fun Spot, both in New Hampshire, helped you realize the end result that the two different approaches to collecting can have.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that turned out to be sort of the spark that got me thinking about this. And this being me, it takes me forever to go from thought to action. But yeah, I've finally been taking some steps, and it's been beneficial. Another nice thing about it is that other people out there who love and want to play with these vintage computers have a way to get them from me.
So by what criteria are you deciding what to keep and what to not keep?
Well, I kind of look at the units one at a time and try to make the decision based on, okay, do I have a better version of this? And if I do, or do I have one that's more important to me from a sentimental standpoint, or is it, I have another one that's, say, like a one of a kind. I have the Beagle, that Beagle Brothers 2GS that Randy Brandt gave me a while back. That's not going anywhere, but it may take the place on my shelf of a standard ROM 3 2GS.
But I assume that you're swapping in and out parts and pieces that you want to keep.
Sometimes, yep. I have a very early serial number Apple IIe that I'm not going to swap pieces in and out of, but then I have another IIe that was, that's my IIe from childhood that I have no problem putting chips and boards and things like that in as I need them. And so I have those two Apple IIes, and I don't need the stack of 15 that's sitting over there in the corner.
Do you have a goal for a number of computers that you'll ultimately have?
I'd like to get the whole thing down to less than 10 total units.
And that's down from what?
50 or so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad those other 40 are finding good homes.
Yeah, me too.
This is Lane Roth of Ideas from the Deep. You're listening to Open Apple.
Given all the Apple-1 activity that we've been seeing in the news lately, with the crazy auctions, and now it looks like there's going to be, it looks like there was a gathering of Silicon Valley luminaries that all got together with their Apple-1s, and there's been the Apple IIs are going up in price. I thought we'd bring on a guest this month that has a lot more experience and deep knowledge about these early Apple machines. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Willegal is here with us today.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show, sir, and I've previously met you at VCF. That was, 3 years ago now? 2 years ago?
That one, I don't know, a couple years ago.
Yeah. You're a regular at the New Jersey show, aren't you?
Well, I've been to two of them. I've been to the one that they had in Burlington, Mass., and this year I went down to Atlanta to that one.
Oh, the VCF Southeast.
Yeah.
And you were at the Burlington one way back in 2004 or so?
Yeah, it was something like that. I wasn't that much into vintage computers back then, but it was kind of on the way home from work. And they had, Friday afternoon, they had something going on. They started it. So I stopped in briefly. Yeah.
Were you exhibiting?
No. I just stopped in and said hello and looked around.
Okay. Because I went to that one with Jerry Ellsworth and Ryan Suinaga and Andy Malloy and Kelvin Sherlock. And I would hope that I would remember if I'd met you there as well.
No, I doubt if you would have remembered me, because that was kind of before I did anything.
Before you were famous. And now you are most famous for, if I recall, the Replica 1, which is your Apple-1 replica. When did you start selling that?
Actually, before I did that, I did an Apple II Rev Zero reproduction.
Wow. The Apple II came before the Apple-1.
In my case, it did. And I did that around 2007 or something like that. And I think I did the Apple-1 just a few years ago in 2009 and 10.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm sorry, when I said Replica 1, that's not the correct name. That's Vince Briel's product. Yours is the Mimeo.
I call it the Mimeo. There's a few different people that have done replica Apple-1, so I had to give it a name. Otherwise, if it's just a reproduction Apple-1, it's hard to tell whose is whose. So
what does distinguish yours from other Apple-1 clones?
Well, I mean, Vince's approach is I actually met him at that Burlington VCF briefly. I'm sure he wouldn't have remembered me because I just stopped by and said hello, and I says, wow, that's really wild what you've done there. But he uses some modern components to kind of cut down on cost and component sourcing issues. And mine is pretty much a duplicate of the original, down to the trace layout, the silk screen, everything. The components on mine are the exact same components as are used on the original. As a matter of fact, there's some people that bought my boards and are searching around the world, literally around the world, and finding date code correct components that would have been the same, year manufacturer components that were on the original Apple-1. It's really wild. So, and there's another one called the Uptronics that came out before mine, and it's similar. I think I laid my traces exactly the same way as the original. The Uptronics has the same basic layout. I don't think it's as detailed a reproduction. And there's another guy in Hong Kong that's done one too. So it's,
given the prices that these auctions are going at these days, would it be theoretically possible to take one of your Mimeos and pull off a forgery, a fake Apple-1 as the real thing?
I think I mentioned the Optronics. Somebody actually tried to pass an Optronics off as a real one a few years ago. As far as I know, nobody's tried to pass off one of my Mimeos. If you know the boards really well, you can tell the difference. But if you're not knowledgeable or not up to, not I guess an expert, you could be fooled, I'm sure.
Now,
so, yeah.
These auctions have been going on. I've seen your name in a few of the articles that have been talking about them. They seem to be coming to you as that expert. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, that's kind of a funny story. I think when I was working with a few other guys in the reproduction, digging up original information on original boards, and we basically cataloged a bunch of original boards. And I said, well, let me put up a website documenting what I found. And so I put up this website I call the Apple-1 Registry. And that's kind of been a reference people have used for original Apple-1 information. And people have noticed that, and now they start emailing me and ask me questions. It kind of cascaded from that registry thing. Plus, I think Ken, I don't know if you actually hooked me up with Greg at Computer World, but there's been a few different connections going on.
In November 2010, when I was working at Computer World, reporter Greg Kaiser did a story about the Apple-1 going on sale at Christie's, and then when it actually did go on sale, he didn't have the time to go back and report about how much it went for. So I wrote that story, tapped my Apple-1 resources, which included you and Eric Rucker, and once Greg Kaiser had future opportunities to write about the Apple-1, he tapped me for some of the resources I used for my story, and now you're a regular go-to guy at Computer World, even though I'm not even there anymore.
Now, how has it been trying to hunt down information about these Apple-1s for your registry and talking to people?
Well, it's interesting. Actually, once I put the registry up, some people, original Apple-1 owners, would send me emails saying, "Oh, I've got one too," and it's not in your registry. And that's been going on for since I put up the registry. And as a matter of fact, for some reason, there's been a big influx of new information over the past few weeks, where I've got like 5 or 6 new Apple-1s identified that aren't in the registry.
It's funny how these high-priced auctions sort of bring that stuff out of the woodwork that way.
Yeah, and, there's been several of those auctions, and I was thinking, okay, this is old news now. Apple-1s are going for high price. How come they're still, making news like it, at one point, it was big news, and now it seems like it's just repetitive news, but it still seems to attract attention.
Yeah, it's that the Apple Zeitgeist thing, I guess.
Yeah. But, you know, it's been interesting. I've had, you know, Wendell Sanders been huge in the Apple-1 community. You know, he's known kind of in the history books as the engineer behind the Apple III, but he's really been, in terms of the Apple-1 community, the guys working on reproductions and original systems, he's been really involved. And actually, when I designed my reproduction, he helped me out with a few questions I couldn't answer on my own. So it's been interesting.
So what motivates someone to decide, hey, I want to make an Apple-1 replica?
Well, actually, I got to go back to the Apple II Rev Zero I did first, because that's the first one I did.
Okay.
And the reason why I did that is I had an Apple II I bought one in early 1978. It was like serial number 2600 or something like that. And over the years, I'd lent it to my mother, who used it in an accounting business. And when she gave it back, it had a few repairs. It didn't have the original motherboard. And I was looking at the prices of original Rev Zero motherboards, and I said, well, for that, I can build one. So I ended up building a Rev Zero motherboard to kind of put my Apple II kind of back the way it was.
So when you say you built a Rev Zero Apple II motherboard, is that you fabricated, that was your first replica?
Yeah, I basically replicated the printed circuit board layout, you know, as close as I could make it. And it, you know, basically I found some old Integer ROM chips, plugged it in, and it basically is essentially a clone of a Apple II Rev Zero motherboard.
Wow. Sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, this is the other strange thing. It is a lot of work. And I would get up in the morning, you know, and before work and spend an hour or so working on it. And over a period of 4 or 5 months, you know, put in, you know, maybe 10 hours a week on it. And, yeah, it's a ton of work.
What led you to duplicate these computers as opposed to some PDPs or Commodores or any other of the retro computers out there?
Okay, so the Apple II, obviously, because, you know, I had one. Then the next one I did was the Mimeo, the Apple-1 clone. And I did that one because there was an Optronics clone out there. And then there was Vince Briel's, which isn't really a clone. It's more of a, I guess you'd call it a work-alike. I mean, it's functionally pretty close, but it's not the same thing as having an original board. And Steve Gabney, who'd done the Optronics, he was hard to reach by email and stuff. And I knew I'd done the Rev Zero, and so I knew I could do it. And so I started searching around. Well, I thought I could do it, but the first thing I did was, can I find all the old components to build one? Because if you can't find the components, you know, there's no point in building a printed circuit board. But I figured out I could find the components. And I had a few people asking me about it, and I decided to give it a whirl, mainly because I answer emails most of the time. And Steve Gabney really didn't very often. So I figured, well, maybe there's a place for somebody that makes a clone and will answer emails.
That's your niche market then.
Oh, well, yeah, I used to have a joke that the total available market was 20 people.
And I assume you've expanded your market beyond that original 20.
Well, the Apple II Rev Zero, I sold 16 PCBs, so for that one, I'm not that far off, but I'll probably do another batch of those because it's been a while since I had those, and I get emails every month, people asking about those.
Now, how come when people are looking for an Apple-1 clone, it seems to me like Vince Briel's product has more market awareness than yours? Do you feel that's an accurate assessment?
Vince has hit a much different price point. I mean, his system's I think it's under $200 or around $200 or something like that. And to build a clone, it costs, just in parts to build the power supply on a clone Apple-1 is like $100. That's just the cost. And if you want to make any money, you got to charge more than that. So to build a clone Apple-1, you're talking about $1,000, which is a much different price point and takes a much more fanatical person.
Wow. Yeah, also.
Yeah.
Huh. Now, I assume that the Apple-1 or the Apple-2 were not your first computers. You probably gotten to enjoy some other models along the way in your career?
The Apple-2 was my first computer.
Oh, wow.
In 78, there weren't a lot of options. I mean, when I went to, there was I lived in Florida at the time, and there was a bite shop, in Florida. They sold, M-size, SAL-20s, and Apple-2s. I think they probably had some other systems, S100 systems in there. And, it was really a decision between a S100 system like a SAL-20 and the Apple-2 back then. But the SAL-20, to get color in it, to equip it to similar to the Apple-2 is about $500 or $600 more.
Sounds like an easy decision.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of hard though, because it was, that S100 bus was the standard bus. Mm-hmm. And when you're going with this Apple-2, there wasn't many people making peripheral cards or any for an Apple-2. So you're kind of taking a chance.
I guess that makes sense. You've obviously got the Apple-1 and the Apple-2 clones, but you cloned another computer as well, and I believe that you showed that off at VCF Southeast. Is that right?
Right. So this is actually, I was glad you brought that up, because I've got a passionate. My passion right now is for this computer called the Selby. Mm-hmm. And this thing it was, in my mind, the first company formed to sell computers to people. In April '74, they were advertising in ham magazines. I believe it was Radio Electronics. They had a small ad. And if you look back in the history and the, kind of the newsletters for the amateur computer users back then, the Selby was kind of the high end, the computer, the best system out there for a while. And it was kind of been forgotten.
How is it cloning that versus, say, cloning the Apple-1 or the Apple-2? Well,
the Selby, it's a lot, I think it was a lot harder. The Selby was 6 boards, like an Apple-1 or an Apple-2 motherboard's 1 board. So I had to do 6 boards. The layout of the Apple-1 and the Apple-2, the actual Apple-2 layout was done digitally. And the Apple-1 layout was done by this guy that did a bunch of Atari motherboards for the Atari console games. Okay. So he was really, really good. But the guys that did the Selby, the PCB layout, they did it on their own. So it's a lot quirkier, less consistent. So anyway, I mean, these guys that built up the Selby, they had basically, they were killed by the Altair essentially because they couldn't compete on price. And the 8008 was, incredibly slow. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I've done some benchmarks. Egan Ford has done some he's been benchmarking 8-bit micros. Mm-hmm. And like to run a Pi generation program. And the 8008 is like, 10 times slower than a 6502. It's running about 30,000 instructions per second.
That's a significant difference.
Oh yeah, and they had a BASIC on the Selby. They had a floating point BASIC, which Apple didn't come out with until they, hooked up with Microsoft. Mm-hmm. But you're running that basic. I actually don't have the full system going yet that I can run basic on it. But it's incredibly slow.
Okay, so let's getting back to the Apple-1 here for just a minute. So if I wanted to buy a board from you to build my own Mimeo 1, do you have kits available right now? And if so, how much would that cost me?
Well, so right now I stopped selling full kits myself. It just was a time sink, and I wasn't, there's no money in this really to speak of. So I was just like spending all my time, sorting through parts and putting together kits. So I'll sell a bare motherboard. There's a company up in Pennsylvania called Unicorn Electronics, and I sent them the bill of materials, and they can sell you the parts kits to build it. So between me and Unicorn, you can get a kit of parts and a PCB and build one up. My board is $150. And I believe at Unicorn, I haven't checked recently, but I believe his parts kits are $666.
What a convenient price point.
Just like the good old days.
Yeah, it's funny. When I first sold I did sell kits for a while, and when I did that, I was selling them for $666 too. But like I said, there wasn't a lot of money in it, and it was a time sink like unbelievable.
Sure.
So.
And you've done what, 2 or 3 runs now of these boards?
4, 5. I've sold just short of 100 boards.
Wow. Okay. Now, are you doing revisions with each run of boards as you find, a detail here or there that might be off that you want to correct, or are these all the same going back to the first run?
I've done a few minor revisions. Yes. Typically, I mean, it's funny. There isn't a lot of difference. If you saw one of my original boards and my current boards and you didn't know the difference, they'd look identical. But there's been a few minor tweaks as I've discovered discrepancies.
Okay, so for around $750 to $800, I can have my own working Apple-1 replica or a Mimeo 1.
Right.
It's interesting then, because I'm looking at this eBay auction, and I've seen this a few times online. They'll have one of yours or one of these. I guess there's a Newton one, which is a different selling. The starting bids $1,200, $1,500. That's crazy, but how do you feel about that?
Well, those are all built up, right, and working.
Well, the one that I'm looking at right now is actually just the board and the part
and the parts
and the parts, and then he will negotiate with you for an extra cost if you want him to assemble it for you.
Yeah. Okay. That guy. Yeah. No, but he's got the parts kit. I don't know if he got his own parts or he got them from Unicorn. He has a cassette interface, which is additional money. Mm-hmm. I do sell cassette interface kits. They're $75. So. And he has a few other things. I don't know if, you can basically get a board from me, a parts kit from Unicorn, probably get most of what you need for about $1,000. So I don't know.
Okay. So
where that 1,200 starting price is coming from.
Okay. Probably for his time to put it all together for you or something.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Mike, this is a great hobby that you have, but I assume you've also made a career out of these skills you've developed?
Well, yeah, that's the funny thing. When I got into the Apple-2 in early '78, I was actually majoring in college in mechanical engineering, and I switched to software engineering after getting the Apple-2. And within a year after that, I got a job at a company that was making mini computers. And I've been in high tech since then. But the interesting thing is when I got into the mini computers, I kind of forgot about the micros. And so when I pulled my Apple II stuff out of the attic, it was kind of in a time warp of the late 70s. So I know when you guys are always talking about these games that came out in the 80s and stuff like that, I'm kind of unaware of them to some extent.
There's just this big hole missing in your Apple II history.
Yeah, exactly.
And when did you pull it out of the closet or out of the attic?
Oh, it was well, that's another story. I was into photography for a while, and I wanted to build my own shutter tester because I was into still film cameras that had mechanical shutters. And actually, I figured I got this Apple II. I can probably build it out of that. So I brought it down out of the attic to build the shutter tester. It turns out it didn't work well, so I got another one off eBay for $45. That was a 2 plus, but
yeah, anything the Apple II does can probably be done more easily and more cheaply with something else, but not nearly for as much fun.
Well, not. I mean, so I built the shutter tester on that, and it worked out pretty well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, what's replaced those micros the microcomputers of the 70s, 80s is these microcontrollers, these, Atmels, God, losing my mind here. The Arduinos and those sort of things are kind of replacing what we used to do with micros back then.
Yeah, and the Apple Pi and mobile platforms.
Exactly, Raspberry Pi, whatever. People are doing that kind of stuff, which used to be done in microcomputers.
Yeah, you mentioned Egan Ford was working on a Pi generator. I assume you were referring to Raspberry Pi and not some sort of a...
No, I mean mathematical Pi.
Oh, okay. There's so many applications for the word Pi in today's hobbyist community.
Yeah, so he's actually gone and done a bunch of benchmarks on different 8-bit micros and see which one can generate pi to 1,000 digits fastest.
Oh, okay, that kind of Pi. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm very glad that you took your Apple II out of the closet, and that even if it presented you with some difficulties in getting it to do what you want, I'm glad you stuck around.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's really been fun. Great people.
Get what's new and exciting in retro computing with 2 News.
So we like to keep track of former guests that have appeared on the Open Apple podcast, and recently it was announced that Melissa Barron, who appeared on, I think, show number 9. Does that sound right, Ken?
I know she's been on the show. I think it was November of our first year, so that would probably be around number 9, yeah.
She has been busy with her glitch art, which she's demonstrated at KansasFest's past, and she's announced that her art will be exhibited as part of the Glitch Momentums at the Furtherfield Gallery in London. The exhibit runs from June 8th through July 28th of this year.
Oh, that girl does get around. Her art, I mean, we've talked about her exhibiting, internationally, nationally, and at KansasFest, and it's just amazing how much attention what we would think would just be an amazingly cool yet quirky thing in our own community is getting international attention.
Yeah, it's very nice to see.
Yeah, I would have thought the market for that would have been 20 units like my Rev Zero, but apparently it's not.
I was talking to her at KansasFest, I think, last year, and she was saying that she gets a lot of requests for the glitch art weavings that she's done. I guess those are very popular, but she builds them not to last. They're designed to fall apart after a little while, so she doesn't feel good about selling them.
But isn't planned obsolescence an integral quality of any consumer product?
You would think so. Yeah. The exhibit runs, as I said, from June 8th through July 28th of this year. If you're in England, in that area, maybe stop by, and if you're listening to the show, hey, let us know what it was like. The exhibit is curated by Rosa Menkem and Furtherfield, and it looks like it's open Friday through Sunday from 11 to 5 p.m. And we'll have a link in the show notes to all the details.
For once, we're actually talking about an event before it happens.
I know, crazy. Well, by the time we edit and put everything online, it could be
August.
It could be several months before it's.
No, I'm pretty sure our listeners will be hearing this sometime in the month of July.
I would hope so. Yes.
Excellent. Well, congratulations, Melissa.
Yeah, nice to see.
I hope she doesn't become too popular for KansasFest. Is she on the list to attend this year?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the list.
Let me pull up that list. Let's see. That might be a whole nother... Yeah, she's coming this year.
Okay.
Excellent. So she'll have some of her work with her, I bet. Cool. Alrighty, what's next on our spreadsheet? Speaking of conventions, we have 3 coming up. KansasFest, which I just mentioned, is being held July 23rd to the 28th, opening with a keynote speech by Randy Wigginton, and it is going to be a fantastic week. It's also the 30th anniversary of the movie War Games, so there's been some discussion about having a personal screening of that right at the Rockhurst campus. I need to figure out where the JuiceGS staff photo is going to take place this year, because we try to have it in someplace quirky on campus every year, and we've been having this event at Rockhurst since 2005, so I'm wondering if the campus is starting to run out of quirks for us to exploit. However, one person I do not see on the list for this year's KansasFest, and there are a ton, by the way. There are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, at least 10 people, 11, who have never been to KansasFest before. So it's going to be a huge freshman class. However, I still don't see Mr. Mike Willegal coming to KansasFest.
Uh-oh.
What's up with that, sir?
I'm got about time for about 1 trip a year, and this year I went down to VCF Southeast.
I see.
So
David Grealish sniped us.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, maybe in future years you'll make KansasFest that 1 trip?
Yeah, I'd like to do that. I do have family in the Denver area, so, I mean, getting out that general neck of the woods is not out of the question.
Excellent. I mean, these are your people, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do the Ken Gagney thing and come out to visit friends and family and then hop in my car and we'll drive out to Kansas City.
It's been done.
Like I said, it's not out of the question. I just need to, it needs to line up with some family activities, I think, in Denver.
Cool. Well, Denver is a lovely part of the country, so
Yep,
I would definitely call that worth a trip. While we have KansasFest going on, there will be a bunch of Australians having their own get-together. A couple of years ago, they did Mount Kira Fest, and this year they're doing Oz KFest. I don't know that they filed the proper paperwork to get the rights to the KansasFest name, and I'm sure nobody really cares. But you know what? Any Gathering Apple II users is a great event and worthy of attention, so let's give it up for Oz KFest at Brisbane, Australia, July 27th to 28th. We've been mentioning this event on the show a couple of times, and it still hasn't happened yet, but Andrew Rowan is making a final push for registration and sessions. He has posted to A2 Central and the KFest list and CSA2 all the cool things that are going to be happening there. There will definitely be some new hardware being demonstrated. And I remember at Mount Kira Fest, it was really impressive. All these Apple II users who we don't often see at KansasFest because it's such an inaccessible geographic location to those in Australia, came out of the woodwork with these amazing projects that we had never really heard of. And it demonstrated to me that even in our internet-connected global community, there are still these geographic divides where we don't always know what the other people are doing. So to have an event like Oz KFest that puts those projects and those people in the spotlight is very necessary and very appreciated. So I'm glad to see Andrew coordinating that. Anybody here going?
Well, it's a bit of a plane flight for me, and I think you guys too. But even if you're not going, if you're going to KansasFest, I believe they're planning to have a video link up.
Yes, and I'm pretty sure the setup to do that will be better than when we had it set up with Mount Kira Fest. I remember Mount Kira Fest occurred while KansasFest was being held in the Rockhurst University Residence Hall known as Xavier Loyola, and that separated us from the room in which we actually gave the presentations, which is known colloquially as the Party Barn, and that venue has terrible Wi-Fi. Since then, we've rather consistently gotten access to Corcoran Hall for our stay and for our presentations, and they have much better internet access there. So last year we even did a hookup with our friends in Japan, and I suspect that this year we'll have no difficulty coordinating a link-up with our friends in Australia.
Slightly off topic, do you know if they have, if Rockhurst has gotten access to the Google Fiber thing that's going on in Kansas City? Because that would certainly help with the bandwidth.
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. I assume that the KansasFest committee would know for sure, and I'm no longer on that committee. However, I would not consider it inappropriate for me to drop a quick line to my friends at Rockhurst and just ask them, hey, are you guys benefiting from this? I don't know if I ever mentioned on the show that Rockhurst actually won an award one year from my former employer, Computer World, for their fantastic on-site IT infrastructure and support. So,
cool.
I would not be surprised if they are keeping up with that tradition and getting access to the latest that Kansas City has to offer, including Google Fiber. So I'll find out.
And the other vintage computer-related conference that's taking place this summer will be held on August 4th and 5th in the University Center at the University of Texas, Arlington. And that's VCF Southwest, I believe. This is the second or third year that they've been having it. Admission is $10 for one day, $15 for both day, and it's free for ages 17 and younger. We'll have a link to the show notes. I've never been to this. Have either of you made it down south to this thing?
No, I haven't.
No, neither have I. I'm not a huge VCF fan. I've been to 2 of the East events, and they were enjoyable and certainly worth the drive, whether it was 1 hour or 4 hours, but I don't think VCF appeals to a very, very Apple II-centric individual such as myself, and I wouldn't fly to Texas or elsewhere for it.
I'm sure you would have enjoyed Southeast with the museum that Lonnie Mims put together.
Yeah, we've mentioned on the show that the museum was of far more professional presentation than I think any of us expected. That was very cool to see, and you're absolutely right. I would have enjoyed it, but again, as you said earlier, Mike, you have limited opportunities to travel throughout the year, and so you really have to choose your trips wisely and budget for them. So this year, actually, I made a list earlier, and I'm going to 8 different conventions this year. Most of them are in the Boston area, but to throw on one more that's 2,000 miles away just put me a little bit over my budget.
Yeah, Sure.
Well, then VCF has historically been really associated with the classic computing mailing list. Salam Ismail, I think is how you pronounce it. He started this, and
he started it.
That's right. He started the VCFs back in '97, the first one out in California, and I know that he for a long time was a heavy contributor to that list, and that's where the momentum to get those particular festivals going started. And the classic computing list has a very heavy mainframe mini computer, and especially DEC PDP influence. So in the past, when you went to these, that's what you got. You didn't get a whole lot of the home computer.
Well, I kind of disagree with that, Mike.
Oh, really?
I think there's a wide range of computers there.
Okay.
It's not certainly at this VCF East. There's a few guys that drag their PDPs in there, but there's almost always Commodores and Atari systems, and last year somebody had an IBM PC type setup, and we always have a few Apple nuts there. So I think it's pretty diverse. But to tell you the truth, I think. And this is the thing, when I did mention went to the Burlington one, and I just kind of dropped in and snooped around the exhibit area. But the real interesting thing about these VCFs are the talks, which is, and they get some of them are better than others, but, there's some very interesting people that kind of tell, what it was like. So I think I don't see it as a mini computer thing. I see it as a kind of a mix of things.
Now, the VCFs I've been to, I didn't even notice that they had talks. It seemed almost exclusively to be an exhibit hall event.
Yeah, well, I think that's not. Yeah, the talks, the ones on the east, especially, are in the Info Age Center. The talks are in different rooms, but last year they had Dan Cockey there, and he gave a wonderful talk on what was going on at Apple in the early days.
I think a lot, especially in the early days, the VCF, the original one that was in San Francisco, hasn't been held for many years now, but those first VCFs, like you said, Ken, were really heavily just exhibitor halls and seeing the actual computers. I don't remember there being talk of sessions at all. It's the ones out, especially on the East Coast, that have really kind of expanded it and made it a much better presentation, I think, adding to that exhibit hall, like Mike was saying, speakers, significant speakers from computer history that really make it interesting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would say that VCF is finally maturing to the state that KansasFest has been at for decades.
Indeed.
There you go.
A little friendly rivalry there. So it's good to give them something to aspire to.
That's right.
Well, I think that's our convention circuit for this month. Let's move on to the specialty area of our guest of the month. Retro computing projects on Kickstarter are not necessarily unheard of, but they are somewhat uncommon compared to the wealth of other projects for art, comic books, dance, theater, and especially video games. However, we do see a book being published on Kickstarter by Mr. Robert J. Luther, and that book is called The First Apple. And he is referring not only to the Apple-1, but he is referring to what he believes is the first Apple-1, the Apple-1. He has some information about this computer, and he has written a book of between 200 and 300 pages. And he went on Kickstarter to ask for funding to publish it and wanted $3,500 and received more than double that at $7,891. The funding period was May 22nd to June 21st. And I can see a few of my Apple II buddies, actually 3 of them who will be at KFest, all backed the project and will be getting copies of the ebook or of the paperback or the hardcover. This gentleman, Mr. Luther, has been on Bloomberg News, Bloomberg TV, with interviews about the Apple-1, which, as Mike Willegal said earlier, has been very popular, a news item lately. However, via Twitter, I determined that Mr. Jason Scott is not very enthusiastic about this project. He feels that there really isn't a story there. It's more of a long-form essay. At over 200 pages, I don't know necessarily what the content of those pages might be. I don't know if there's really a story there or if it's more anecdotal or schematics or the like. However, it is interesting. What do you think about this, Mike Willegal?
Well, actually, I talked to Bob had an assistant interview me, must have been a couple years ago, and a couple of the other guys working on reproduction. So I'm very curious to see what he's got in terms of if he's got a story. I mean, and it's probably worthwhile to see. The thing about the Apple-1 is that story's been told over and over and over again by Oz and numerous other people, and it's going to be hard to. I think it'd be hard to come up with something really new. I don't know. What do you guys think?
The story of this particular Apple-1 might be a little bit interesting. I don't know that it merits a book. I think, like you said, an essay may be more in line with what he should be putting out here. He says here in the Kickstarter article that after I purchased the 1976 Apple-1 computer at a self-storage auction, I looked into its history. The most logical source of the info was the previous owner, but that was complicated. He'd sold his tech company for $100 million during a tech boom, stopped making payments on his private jet, fled the country to Venezuela, and abandoned his young... I don't need all that. So Bob was trying to find this guy, and he died at age 50. So it looks like, yeah, like I said, I think that maybe the specific provenance of this Apple-1 is interesting, but a whole book about the thing, I don't know.
I thought it was more than one Apple-1 he was talking about.
Oh, was it?
I don't know. It's kind of a mystery what he's coming up with.
Well, we won't have long to wait because according to Kickstarter, the ebook will be out July 2013. That's this month.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he has to say.
Well, I'm encouraged that he, regardless of the quality or the content of the book, this guy set a reasonable goal on Kickstarter, and he had a decent video to promote it. You may recall that What's Where in the Apple also had a Kickstarter, and in my opinion, I think the $15,000 that he was asking, if that number is correct, was a little bit ambitious, and the video was, to be honest, somewhat amateurish. So I think this project showed how a Kickstarter on the original Apple computers can be done, and he proved that it is feasible. So I hope that, if nothing else, this encourages other retro computing enthusiasts to view Kickstarter as a viable medium in which to make their projects a reality.
Definitely. Cool. It looks like there's a photo here at the top of the Kickstarter page that it's sort of a close-up of an Apple-1 board. It looks like it's missing a bunch of chips. I don't know if that's his or...
I would assume that's a still from the video, but I don't want to sit down and watch the entire 7 minutes right now.
So yeah, This is something that I will probably buy, just because this sort of thing interests me, and I'm sure we'll talk about it on an upcoming episode.
Is there a reason you didn't back it? Since you're going to buy it in the end anyway.
No, there isn't.
Okay.
There's one interesting fact there. I had that Apple-1 registry, and there was one computer, it was called Ricketts Apple-1, and he's the one that ended up with it. And because he's publishing this book, I figured out where it is. So, it's kind of...
Wait, you figured out where what is now?
On my Apple-1 registry, I try to, log where all these Apple-1s are now, right?
Gotcha.
And I had one listed because I'd found some reference to it on the internet, and then I saw his thing, and I said, "Oh, that's where it is."
You made the connection. Got it.
Oh yeah, cool. So this Charles Ricketts was the original owner of this, and that's what you had documented.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad that he was able to provide you that missing link. And there are 5 other Apple-1s that recently surfaced. Not they were necessarily lost, but 5 Apple-1s showed up in one place, which in the last 30 years of Apple II history history is probably unprecedented.
I can probably tell you a little bit about it because the guy at the museum, Ralph Simpson.
This is at the San Jose Museum, History San Jose.
History San Jose. He was a volunteer there, and they had this Apple-1, and he wanted to get it running. And the directors of the museum didn't want to touch the thing because it's a precious artifact.
Sure.
But he finally convinced them, it's okay to get it running. And he contacted me saying, "You got any hints about bringing up this Apple-1?" And first thing I did is, since he was out in San Jose, I put him in touch with Wendell Sander. And Wendell said, "Oh, I bet Dan Cockey would be interested too." So by the time this whole thing came about, it's interesting because the original Apple employees like Wendell and Dan Cockey, the Huston brothers, Woz, Baum, these guys are still communicating. They're very tight-knit group. And, once kind of Wendell got involved, he invited all his friends, and all of a sudden they ended up with 5 of them there. It was kind of surprising.
And so 3 of those 5 were actually in working condition.
Yeah, well, they had a meeting a couple weeks before they invited the press where, Wendell brought his up, and they put together a plan to bring up the one in the museum, and I forgot which other one worked. And the other interesting thing there is a number of us have been asking Woz over the years, every year or so, where's your Apple-1? And he says, "I don't know."
He doesn't know?
He didn't know. Well, that's what he always answered, right? What's going on with your Apple-1? Well, it's funny, when when he decided to bring his Apple-1 along, so I guess he did know where it was.
I'm glad he didn't, forget it in the closet or something.
Yeah, but that wasn't a prototype. That was a late production model that he owns, and actually, I think Wendell's working on getting that one working too.
All the Apple-1s were originally hand-assembled by Woz, right? Or were they mass-produced?
It's kind of a combination of things. They used a PCB vendor to make the boards. They stuffed the boards. They wave soldered them, which is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that technology, but it's basically they plug all the chips in the board and all the parts in the board, and they run it over a solder bath, and it basically solders the board in one pass. And then they shipped them, at least the early ones, over to the Jobs house, and Jobs' sister stuffed the chips in the board. And Dan Cockey actually is the guy that brought them up and got them working. But nobody hand soldered them.
But it is fair to say that every Apple-1 was held by Woz at some point?
Probably not.
Oh.
Because Dan Cockey did the bring up. Woz's sister put the chips on the board. And like I said, Dan did this speech at VCF East a year ago, and he talked about how Woz would show up at Jobs' house about once every 2 weeks or so to see what was going on. So he wasn't engaged in bringing up boards.
Oh.
According to Dan.
I mean, I guess this probably isn't news to anybody else, but I don't know, I always envisioned Jobs and Woz really, really launching their company and their careers in that garage, just, slaving the night away and putting together all these apples to fulfill all these orders.
Yeah, I think it was Dan Cockey.
Oh. Right.
Not to say that they didn't. I mean, it's taken me 2 weeks once to get an Apple-1 clone working, so it's non-trivial amount of effort. But they weren't there with soldering irons, soldering sockets on boards.
Well, Dan Cockey is my new personal hero. I want to see him on Dancing with the Stars.
All three of the working Apple-1s, it looks like, were put to use at this little gathering. Volunteers inserted a program taped to the cassette drive and primitive digital images of the Apple icon and of Woz and Jobs and of the Apple II appeared. Meantime, Sanders' computer ran a Star Trek game, and Alan Baum's featured the Game of Life. I wonder, it doesn't say who the third working computer belonged to. Do you know the answer to that, Mike?
There was one guy that was a computer shop owner. It might have been that one.
Andy Wong. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
So then Woz's Apple-1 would actually be one that wasn't working?
It's not working. I think Wendell's working on getting it working for Woz. It's missing some parts right now.
Oh.
And when you say the Game of Life, I assume that's Conway's Game of Life.
It doesn't say, but I would assume that's the one, yeah.
As opposed to the Milton Bradley board game.
What is Conway's Game of Life?
It is a artificial life simulator of
that's the one where the little blobs show up on the screen.
Exactly, yeah.
It would be that one. There is a life game for the Apple-1 out there.
Yeah, and Peter Neubauer wrote it for the Apple II and won a Hackfest with it a couple years ago. That's actually was my first introduction to the game. I've since found an iOS game called Conway where you actually have to destroy civilizations using the rules of Conway's Game of Life.
Aww.
No, it's fun. You get to see them set on fire and poison their lakes and watch them die.
Little people running around in pain.
Yeah, I sent it to Peter Neubauer and said, hey, now that you've created life, maybe you could destroy it on the Apple II as well? But no dice. Maybe this year's Hackfest.
You're a cruel man, Ken Gagne.
I take delight in other people's suffering, it's true.
Yes,
Schadenfreude.
Yep. I've experienced this firsthand.
Yes, you have. Anyway. So we have yet another Apple-1 on the auction block, if we're ready to move on to that topic.
Yeah, I think so.
And we've been talking about how this is still news. Every time it happens, it's news. And I think it's going to continue to be news because of several reasons. One is whenever anything sells for a ridiculous price, people are still getting their minds around how much the Apple-1 is worth. And the prices are, even when they skyrocket, they often skyrocket past what the previous Apple-1 sold for, which is ridiculous. There's still a very limited number of Apple-1s in the world, and that's not changing. In fact, it may even be getting smaller if we're finding out that even Woz doesn't have a working one. And Steve Jobs is still dead. So this is all stuff that contributes to Apple being newsworthy. And this Apple-1 looks like it is going up on the auction block at Christie's next week, according to this article, so that would probably be the last week of June, and they are expecting it to go for at least $500,000.
Ouch.
Which is less than the last one went for. I think that was closer to like 671 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So this is quite the bargain comparatively. But it does say that, it says an expert hired by Christie's recently came to, Ted Perry, a 70-year-old retired school psychologist who owns the old Apple, went to Perry's home to examine the Apple and turn it on. The motherboard is original, obviously the keyboard, monitor, and storage device, which is a portable cassette tape deck, were added later. And the expert says, I was a little afraid to run it, but it still works. and with the original chips. And that's pretty rare as far as I know. I remember the one that sold back in November 2010 had some replacement parts on it, which seems to be pretty common. This one actually says it has the original chips. Mike Willegal, do you think that will influence the price and cause it to sell for even more?
Well, I'm still trying to get my head around these prices these things are getting. And
I mean, it's not much different from the price you charge for your clones.
Well, I figured I could build 500 clones for the cost of one of those.
Just a couple of extra zeros at the end there.
Close enough.
No, I don't. People ask me all the time about, what's the, people say, do you think the price is going up or down in the future? And I said, if I knew that, I'd be dealing in Apple-1s. I don't know. I think the interesting thing is, though, a lot of those high dollar sales have been overseas. Either, I think there was one guy in Italy, and the last two that went over $500,000 went to Asia. So there's probably some demand in foreign markets.
Or maybe they're just richer than us.
Yeah, well, they've got all our money, right? Isn't that?
No, they have all our money.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was wondering if this is just like a circle of rich guys that are 5 or 6 rich guys that are just selling their Apple-1s back and forth to each other or something. No.
What's really happening is there's guys like this guy that just surfaced, that had one from the late 70s, early 80s or whatever. They're looking at the value of these things and saying, I better cash in.
Yeah, it says he acquired his Apple-1 in either 1979 or 80 as a secondhand item that he saw advertised, and he paid nothing for it. It was a swap with another owner.
So I think the interesting thing about Apple-1s is that they've been collectible since the 80s at least, if not before then.
Yeah, I saw and I can't remember the source on this, but I was reading an article, maybe it was in Byte or something. It was Woz back in like 83 or 84 saying that he had heard of Apple-1s being sold for as much as $10,000 back then. So.
Right. So the interesting thing is, if Apple as a company, loses their mojo or whatever, I would expect the value of these things to go down. I think a lot of it's riding on the value of the company. But, for instance, that Selby we mentioned earlier, there are probably only 10 or 15 of those in existence. And the same auction, where the Apple-1 went for $600,000, the Selby went for $15,000. Even though, in my mind, it's just as historically significant, except for the company.
Yeah, that's quite a difference in price. So this latest auction that Christie's is holding is it's going to be part of First Byte's iconic technology from the 20th century, and it will be conducted online only from June 24th through July 9th. This particular Apple-1 will be displayed starting that Monday at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View.
So folks will have 2 weeks to watch the price on this escalate?
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. I wonder what benefits an official auction house brings over eBay other than an expert being there to authenticate and verify the product. Because I assume they take a cut, of course, of the final sales. It's how they make their money, same as Kickstarter. So why would somebody with an Apple-1 not just go on eBay and say, hey, I'm going to keep all the money and sell it myself?
Oh, I think it makes a huge difference. There are high-end art collectors and people like this who are going to be spending this money who wouldn't deal with eBay because, the auction houses are established and it's sort of a, kind of a hoity-toity, I spend my money here because I can thing.
And it's also more of a caveat emptor situation
exactly.
on eBay.
Right.
Yep.
And I'm sure these guys have connections. They know the collectors there's probably collectors around, can you get me one? And, they're saying, hey, we got one for auction. So there's some of that probably going on too, where, if you just put it on eBay, unless you send emails to the guy saying, hey, I got this one on eBay, and the guy looking for one,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But you're right. There is a big cut that the auction house takes. I'm told after taxes and after the cut of the auction house, you might bring home 35% of the final price that they advertise.
That's it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you got to figure the government's going to get, when you're talking about those numbers, you're in the highest tax bracket. So.
And the higher the sale price, the larger percentage I think the auction house takes from it.
Well, they take money from the buyer and the seller.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite a racket.
Yeah, I'll say. All the more reason to do it on your own if you can, but oh well, whatever.
So, there's a number of private sales that go on. We're behind the scenes.
We've been talking a lot about Apple-1s here, but one of the recent trends on that we've seen a lot on eBay has been the price of original Apple-2s getting higher and higher and higher. On June 10th, an original Apple II, sold for $23,099 after 41 bids. Now, this is a very early Apple II. It's one of the ones that did not have the ventilation holes cut in the side. The serial number tag on the bottom says that it's number 47. It does have the white ceramic 6502. Mike, have you seen this auction?
Yeah, that was... when's the last time you've seen a ventless Apple II go up for sale?
Yeah, it's this is definitely a rare item. So I guess the price is obviously way out of what I could afford, but it's nice to see. Now it looks like it does have one of the later keyboards without the raised power light. Oh no, I'm sorry. There were actually two machines that sold in this auction. One of them was this original Apple II, and one was a later one. And it's kind of neat because the seller has actually posted a series of really high resolution pictures, and you can get a good look at some of the detail on this machine. And I was talking with another Apple II collector and enthusiast, Paul Hagstrom, and we were discussing sort of the wild case irregularities. You can see the rough edges and how things sort of didn't fit together. And I think this machine actually dates back to when Apple was still using the wooden case molds that they had all those problems with.
Yeah, Dan Cockey talks about how he had to file the cases to make the keyboards fit.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's definitely an early one.
And I read somewhere that these early Apple IIs were so different from each other, in fact, that a lid from one Apple II usually wouldn't fit on another one because of the variances in the case differences.
I hadn't heard that story.
Okay. I could be wrong.
No, you could be right.
That doesn't happen very often.
I'm wrong more than you can believe.
So, Mike, if I'm looking at this, and the pictures look great and all that, but if I'm going to drop $25,000 on an auction on eBay, like Ken said, it's sort of a caveat emptor situation. How can I be sure that this is actually a Rev Zero Apple II, and that what I'm looking at is not something that's got chips swapped out and things like that?
I don't know. I before I drop that kind of money, I'd want to see it in person and meet who's selling it.
Okay.
And I'm sure that could be arranged. You send a message to the guy. I want to see it. I want to talk to you.
Sure.
I want to break your legs and run away with your computer.
Exactly, yeah.
Meet me in the alley.
But are there certain things that I could look at? So these pictures are really high quality, and you can get a lot of detail here. Are there certain things that I can look at and immediately see that, no, this is not an original Apple II?
That picture looked like an original.
Okay.
I don't know if I can't remember. I'm not looking at it right now, but I can't remember if the ROMs had been replaced or they still had the integer ROMs in it. But otherwise, I think it looked pretty original.
Okay. Well, what I'm getting at, I guess, is that you have a guide on your page, right, that talks about some of these identifying features and what makes it a Rev 0 as opposed to a Rev 7 or something like that.
Yeah, the easiest thing actually for a Rev 0 board to identify, and almost all internet sites have pictures of that, is on next to the color trim capacitor. There's a color killer transistor on Rev 1s and up, and this is definitely a Rev 0 board.
Okay.
Because it doesn't have that color killer transistor. Yeah, and I look at it. The one thing about it does have AppleSoft ROMs in it, but other than that, it looks pretty original to me.
Well, save your pennies, folks. These things are getting expensive.
Indeed. Alrighty, I love me some Apple II games, so let's talk about one, that being the Prince of Persia. Now, we all know that Tony Diaz was recruited by Jason Scott to save Jordan Mechner's source code to Prince of Persia last year. All parties involved did an excellent job, and that source code has now been published online. The copyright remains with Jordan Mechner, but the code itself is available. In the last year, or actually just in the past few months, Mr. Adam Green went through and commented all the code, making it even easier to understand and to hack. And now another contributor, I believe his name is Mr. Fabian Sanglard, has gone through and is now not only building on those comments, but actually dissecting the code and explaining what each section does. And he's doing it so exhaustively that Mr. Mechner himself left a comment on the blog saying, "Fabian, you're doing an amazing job of reconstructing and explaining the source code better than I could myself. You're reminding me of things I'd completely forgotten after 25 years. Please don't stop now. I'm curious to see how it turns out." So this is a pretty cool disassembly of the code brought to our attention by Open Apple listener Olivier Gunnar. And it is a little bit above and beyond my ken. So I, not being a coder, I'm not necessarily sure I understand it all, but I do recognize some of the terminology as that which is bandied about commonly in the Apple II community. And I'm sure that anybody who understands this stuff will be delighted to see how Prince of Persia was actually written. Yeah, so I recommend taking a look at it. If you're just any sort of a hobbyist enthusiast when it comes to coding, then you'll enjoy this. And even if you're not much of a coder, if you're just a gamer like me, then you'll nonetheless appreciate knowing that this is out there and that people are working with this code, 30 years after it was originally written.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of, first of the fact that it was found and that they were able to rescue the source code, and then the fact that Jordan decided to share it with everybody, and is not only has he put it out there, but he's paying attention to people who are actively interested in it, is really neat, because so many times you deal with these companies like, say, Electronic Arts, who has a huge Apple II back catalog of software. They don't even, if you called them and talked to anybody there, I doubt they would even know what you were talking about. I know that there was a time when I was trying to get EA and some of these other companies to maybe allow us to release their titles as freeware for the Apple II, that I was either told no, or we don't know what you're talking about. So it's kind of refreshing to see Jordan's involvement in this.
Well, especially when you're going right to the source like that. I'm not surprised that the worst company in America, Electronic Arts, doesn't remember stuff that they made 30 years ago. But if you were to go to the guy who wrote the original Madden, well, yeah, he remembers writing that because he's suing Electronic Arts for his royalties. So at the individual level, those memories are there. At the institutional level, they just get absorbed and forgotten. Yeah,
but there are developers out there who either probably don't remember as much or don't care about those titles anymore. So,
possibly. I do recall mentioning on this show a year or two ago, Mr. Justin Legakis, who wrote the Apple II GS game Death Maze. And when I emailed him about it, he's like, "Wow, I haven't thought of that game in decades. No, I don't have the source code. I don't remember it not working on the ROM 3, but I do remember writing it." And, if I thought it was a pretty cool game, and if I had written a game that cool, I'd remember everything about it.
Yep, me too.
You'd remember a game that I wrote?
I would.
Do you remember Spaceship of Death? I wrote that game.
I have a personalized copy.
Personalized?
Signed by the author.
Wow, I don't remember that. That's amazing. Okay, we are moving on the spreadsheet, and I see something I don't recognize. The Amazing Apple Clothing Collection from 1986. Now, given that my wardrobe hasn't been updated in that time, maybe I should know what this is about, but why don't you tell us more about it, co-host Mike?
Why, thank you, co-host Ken. I can certainly do that. So, Apple is obviously known for putting out all kinds of stuff that you can buy, accessories and things like that, to go along with your fancy new Apple computer, whether it's a Cross Pen, Or, well, whatever you can think of.
Ooh, I want an Apple iWatch.
Well, you might have to wait a little while for that. But in the meantime, you can go and purchase, or in 1986, you could have purchased clothing from the Apple collection. Good.is, I guess Good.is, has a close look at a catalog of very, very 80s looking clothing that you could buy and show that you were an Apple geek.
And some of these pieces of apparel don't even look very Apple branded. I'm looking at one of a young metrosexual couple, and he's wearing a blue sweater. She's wearing a maroon sweater. They got their hands in their pockets, and they don't look very happy about it. And I don't see any Apple branding. Maybe it's when they take off the sweaters and the shirts underneath are branded, but in that particular photo, and actually, as I scroll down, I continue to see things, and I'm like, well, what's the gimmick here? What's the connection?
Yeah, I think the sweaters, yeah, you may be right. You take the sweater off, tie it around your neck, and then whatever you have.
Oh, God, tie it around your neck. Mm-hmm. Like you're one of those prissy seniors in high school or something.
Exactly. So
I'm on the yearbook committee, and you're not. If that's the message you want to send to your friends, you can dress like it's 1986. Yep.
And somehow I doubt you can buy any of this stuff at your local Sears anymore, and I perhaps someone at Apple wishes that this had never been unearthed, but there it is in all of its popped color iZod 80s glory.
Yeah, it looks like Good.is is just reposting these photos from thewallbreakers.com.
Okay.
That's the link we'll have in the show notes. Did either of you have any Apple apparel at any point in your career?
I don't think I do to this day.
Your sartorial tastes have never swung that way?
I used to have an Egghead Software t-shirt. That's, I think, as close as I got.
Yeah, the closest I come is, a couple dozen KansasFest shirts.
Oh,
I have Syndicom and Intrek from the creators of ProTerm. I think that's it, though. I don't remember having any original Apple gear. I still have Apple logo stickers. In fact, some have been sent to me by JuiceGS readers. But, no, that's it.
No, I don't think I have any clothing.
Have you seen it?
You don't have any Apple clothing.
Any clothing at all.
You know what I mean.
That's why this is an audio podcast. Oh, my.
Yeah, I'm glad we shut down that video.
Yeah. Oh, Skype. You have blinded more of us than I care to say.
Sort of related here. Have you guys seen that Apple T-shirts book?
It rings a bell. We may have talked about it on the show.
Yeah, Apple T-shirts, a yearbook of history at Apple Computer. It's 204-page hardcover coffee table book with some really outstanding pictures of the various T-shirts that Apple has put out over the years. This sort of reminded me of that, so it looks like that book is...
You think that's a profitable enterprise, producing books on Apple T-shirts?
I like that. That's a niche market of a niche market.
Yes, but if you only put out a few of them and say that they're collectible, you can sell them for $500 a copy.
Maybe.
Wow.
I think that's what that Apple design book is going for these days.
I think I have that book. In fact, I hate that book because it's so tall it doesn't fit on any of my shelves.
Right, yep.
Pain in the butt.
Yep.
Anyway. Alrighty, let's move on to... Oh, we have another ebook coming out. This one is not about the first Apple-1 or whatever you want to call it. This is actually a re-release of a formerly paperback book. This is the ebook edition of the new Apple II User's Guide, written by former Open Apple guest Mr. David Finnegan. He has sold either at KansasFest through Amazon.com or through his own online store over 400 copies of the new Apple II User's Guide. Is that... I hear you sounding impressed, Mr. Mike?
Yeah, that... I didn't know that there would be demand for 400 copies of this.
Yeah, I'm impressed, too. That's a lot.
Yeah, I think that's really neat.
This sounds in line with what Richard Dreher has sold for the CFFA. He usually sells between 400 and 600 of those, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. Those numbers just blow me away. The number of CFFAs Rich has sold. I mean, it's an amazing product, but just to think that market is that big is amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. I mean, it's not like it's a Mimeo or Replica 1 where it's a self-contained unit. The CFFA requires that you have a working Apple II. So that's an even smaller market. The book Mr. Finnegan wrote, of course, doesn't require any hardware or software to read, and he has decided to change that. Now he has an ebook edition. You can read it on your Kindle, your iPad, your iBook, your Nook. There are, of course, multiple ebook formats out there. There's the iBook, there's EPUB, there's AZW for the Kindle, there's Mobi. And he has decided that the most liberal solution, his words, are to go with a PDF version. The PDF is unlocked and unencumbered by any DRM, plus it has hyperlinks to each of the chapters and appendices for your convenience. And so he is selling this book directly from his store, and he says that he'll accept any price over $1. Name your own price, $1 minimum, and you'll get your own copy.
I'd buy that for $1.
So actually, I take it back when I say you can buy through his online store. If I'm reading this announcement on callapple.org correctly, it looks like you actually just email the author directly, and he will coordinate the sale with you. So he'll probably directly just email you the PDF as opposed to buying it through an online store like So he's not selling it through an online store. He's selling it via email. But yeah, so that's a pretty good price. Do you guys think he's selling it for $1 because PDFs are much easier to produce than ebooks? Do you think it's because he's saturated the market and maybe he's trying to sell the ebook version to people who have already given him their money for the paperback edition? What do you think is his philosophy behind this?
I don't have a good idea at all. No clue.
I see this maybe as a way to combat the piracy. If you're going to put a PDF out there, especially one that isn't locked or have loaded with DRM, it's going to get passed around. And if you put it out there and say, pay me $1 for it, you're going to get a lot more, I think, customers and people who will actually pay you than if you say this is $20 and it's DRM locked and all that.
So you think he just doesn't even want to fight that battle?
It's almost like a shareware model, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of. And if that were me, that would be at least part of my motivation for it. Now I know he was working on a second edition of the new Apple II Users Guide. I don't know if this includes those changes and edits or not. It doesn't. He makes no mention of that. So there may be something a little bit further down the line that'll have more information that may, I don't know, cost a little more or something.
I'm pretty sure that the ebook version is the latest version. You're right. I do remember reading that he was working on a second edition, and I haven't heard if that's come out, but I presume that, like Jason Scott, he'll offer some sort of an upgrade guarantee where if you buy one version, you'll get later versions for free. I do the same thing with JuiceGS PDFs, although I don't know that I've ever advertised it, where if you buy one of our concentrates and later on we add new material or we go back and correct existing material to the PDF, I send the updated version to anybody who's ever bought it. Because it's just like software. You know, minor updates are free.
Cool.
Yeah, so I would hope that Mr. Finnegan is working under a similar philosophy. I mean, it's very little effort and very little expense to do so.
Well, if you still prefer your reading material in the Dead Tree edition, the print version is still available for the low price of only $22. Well, and congratulations to David for the success on this. That's really cool to see that so many people are interested in buying the book.
Yeah, he's contributed a lot to this community, whether it's through his extensive online repository, his online web hosting, his book, his ebook. It's very cool to have him in the community, and I hope that he'll come to KFest and own up to everything he's done.
It's awesome.
Admit it.
Mr. Willegal, do you have a copy of his book?
I don't.
Well, we should.
I'll tell you what. With me, I get started on projects, and I try to commit to myself to finishing a project before starting the next one, or otherwise, this house would be falling down from the weight of stuff I'd be bringing in.
Let's see. Sorry, I was on Google pulling up our spreadsheet, and I found a little +1, and I'm being followed by this old-time Apple II user who's actually written for JuiceGS years ago. And there's a picture of him with Will Wheaton and Felicia Day.
Oh wow, crazy!
And he's wearing an Infocom shirt.
That's cool.
He being the Apple II user. So I'm all sorts of titillated right now. Anyway, all right, moving on. We got a couple of movies or videos to talk about. One is Steve Jobs, an interview with him. This is a brief clip. I think it may be part of a longer, more extensive video, but the part that's being bandied about is a 1994 interview with Steve Jobs while he was still at Next. Is that correct? In 94?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he is saying that by the time he's 50 years old, he expects everything he's done for Apple to be obsolete. And, you know, by the time he was 50, that was the year 2005. And in 1994, he's saying, look, the Apple-1 is already obsolete, the Apple-2 is obsolete, the Mac is on the verge of obsolescence. And, you know, he was certainly true or correct about many of those observations at the time about the Apple-1 and the Apple-2 in 94 being obsolete, even though people were still using them, of course, and still are. The Mac being obsolete, well, the Mac of 1994, yes, is definitely obsolete as of 2005. But the Mac itself as a platform is still going strong. I mean, Apple had an extensive presentation at WWDC in June where they talked about the Mac itself for about an hour and a half, which was a nice change from their usual focus on iOS. So the Mac is definitely around. But in general, what do you guys think about Mr. Jobs' comments back in 94?
Yeah, I haven't actually seen the interview, but, you know, you say the Mac is going strong, but PCs in general, the sales are flat to off. So, you know, maybe technology-wise, you know, they've reached a zenith or whatever, and are headed on a downward trend with, you know, smartphones and everything else filling in. So, you know, maybe he's right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think definitely more and more people are going mobile, but I think there's still there's definitely a place in our world for desktop computing and even laptops as opposed to like Netbooks and tablets.
I think right now for content creation, you know, the desktop, the laptop, whatever, are still the preferred thing. Although some people I've heard have gone to tablets and whatever for even content creation. But you know, I can name a lot of people that don't need a full desktop, right? Because they're not creating any content; they're consuming it.
You know, the last desktop computer I owned was the Apple II GS. I've been strictly laptop since then.
Or even laptop, Ken.
Oh, fine. Geez, you're just going to keep changing the rules to exclude me.
No, what I'm saying is, you know, there's a ton of people out there that are consuming content off the internet, right? Or websites or whatever, or doing their shopping off the internet. Well, you know, tablets and smartphones are perfectly adequate for that.
They're not producing anything. They're not giving back to the community at all. They are leeches on our society.
Exactly.
And we must exterminate them.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, we're talking about my parents. They each have an iPad 1, and they're very happy with it because, you know, they surf the web and watch videos and maybe send the occasional email, but they certainly don't send as many emails as they read. So they are definitely consumers, whereas people like us who are designing clones and recording podcasts and writing and editing and publishing magazines, you know, we need something a little bit more substantial.
Well, then we won't eliminate those leeches. We'll be selective.
Well, somebody's got to consume the stuff we're creating, right?
That's right. You know, we can't all be consumers. You know, what we need to find a way to do is to better monetize the leeches. Although I guess my parents would say they've given me enough money already. Oh, well. Yeah, okay. That's enough about Steve Jobs. Let's move on to, Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs.
Ashton Kutcher's Jobs movie finally was supposed to come out months ago and now has a new date. And that date is August 16th. And the capitalization of the name has changed. The name hasn't changed. It's still called Jobs as opposed to Jobs. But now it's capital J, lowercase OBS. Whereas before it was lowercase j, capital OBS. So it's inverted itself.
So do you think they redid parts of the movie or just redid the marketing in this delay?
I haven't a clue. What do you think, co-host?
I think it's probably marketing, and I think they realized that they could probably make more money if they release it during the summer months than if they released it in spring.
You think this is going to be a summer blockbuster?
I think they think it's going to be a summer blockbuster.
Okay, I'm trying to load up. Oh, here we go. There is an official trailer before all,
Yeah.
but
By the way, the Mimeo is featured in that movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So they just send you an email?
I shouldn't say featured. It's got a cameo role.
Yeah. So did they just email you and say, hey, we want to buy a few of these for the movie?
Yeah, the prop house actually contacted me, and it's a little bit of an interesting story. And I only had 8 of them, 8 boards sitting in my shelf at that time. I'm lucky I had 8 because a lot of times I don't got any. But they said, "Oh, we need them in 3 weeks." And of course they were bare boards; they weren't built up. I didn't have all the parts, so I sent them some of the key parts that, the big blue capacitors.
Mm-hmm.
And the boards, and they said, well, we'll just find sockets and parts that fit in it and build it up ourselves. So they're non-working. Although in the trailer you can see a display
Mm-hmm.
of characters going out, and that was done by a real Apple-1 or a clone. So they have at least one working Apple-1 over there in that movie, but most of them are non-working props. Based on Mimeos.
Well, that's very cool.
Yeah, so I got to see that movie to
see your stuff.
Even though I can look in the closet here and see it.
Well, as we've mentioned, there is a high definition official trailer that's been released, which I think is more than just the clip that had been floating around that Oz had sort of trashed earlier this year. So you can check that out. We'll have the link in the show notes.
Yeah, while you guys have been gabbing away, I just watched the trailer, and it is fantastic. All we'd seen before was the focus... Sorry, part of the trailer just made me laugh. They were talking about what to name the company, and Steve Jobs said Apple, and Woz says, that is so much better than phaser beam computers. I'm like, I don't think they were ever actually considering that. They're just trying to, again, exploit how Woz was the nerd and Jobs had the marketing savvy.
Right.
But nonetheless, it looks like a really fun trailer. It encompasses a lot of Apple's and Steve Jobs' lifetimes. And oh my god, the guy they have playing John Scully, when I first saw it, I thought that was John Scully. The resemblance is uncanny. I need to pull this up in the Internet Movie Database and see who they got playing him. Matthew Modine.
Oh, yeah.
What else? He's been in Full Metal Jacket.
That's the one I know
Dark
him
Knight
from.
Rises. He was Foley. I don't know who that is. I didn't see The Dark Knight Rises. The TV series Weeds and The Bedford Diaries. I actually don't recognize him from anything. But you saw Full Metal Jacket.
I did, and I did see him in The Dark Knight Rises. I remember him in that. I watched Weeds, but I don't remember him in that at all.
He was in Memphis Belle, which is a movie back in 1990, which I've seen a couple of times, but not recently. But anyway, yeah, that's a really good casting job right there.
Yeah, I think this trailer they came out with now is a lot more interesting than the one they had before. So that's why I was saying maybe they wonder if they redid parts of the movie or they just redid the marketing.
And this is a theatrical release as opposed to that College Humor thing that came out right to the internet. Yeah, this says coming to theaters August 16th, full site launching soon.
Yep.
Wow. Okay, I am going to go like them on... Oh, I already do like them on Facebook. Okay. Well, the terminology that Facebook uses is so loaded. You're not liking it, you're subscribing to it because you want to get updates. Kind of like friends, I'm not friends with these people. And just because I follow them on Twitter doesn't mean I'm friends with them. And that's what I'm doing on Facebook is I'm following them. But anyway, I'm sorry. That's a completely different rant. That's a talk about the Social Network movie with Mark Zuckerberg as opposed to Jobs. But yeah, who's going to go see this movie? Me. Anybody else?
I definitely got to see the Mimeo cameo.
And co-host?
I'll probably see it on Netflix. I'm not going to make a trip to the theater to see this.
Oh, come on. You'll go see Man of Steel, but you won't see Steve Jobs.
Yeah, it's true.
But you hate the Man of Steel. He's just a pastiche of all these superpowers.
Well, the character is. The movie, on the other hand, was good. Mostly.
Yeah, it had its occasional moments.
The first 2/3 of the movie were excellent, and then it got violent, and they just spent 30 minutes knocking down Manhattan and Smallville.
Fascinating. Some people think it's just the opposite. They're really bored with the first 2/3, and then like, oh, finally the action sequences are amazing.
Oh no, I felt that. I mean, we're way off track here, but I felt that the first 2/3 of the movie were more of the character of Superman than we've ever gotten in any of the movies in most of the comic books.
Interesting. Did you like all the biblical references?
Oh, that was a little over the top, but
like when he's 33, he finds out who his real father is.
Right? Yeah.
Anyway. Slight tangent, but since we were talking about movies anyway. One last topic this month, and of course we always save the best for last. Jason Scott, hi. We know you listen to the show, so
our Jason Scott segment. We need to have somebody cut a voiceover, and we'll get some music for the Jason Scott segment.
Record a bumper just for that.
Yeah, I think so.
When you're hearing conversation about Jason Scott, you know it's the Open Apple Podcast.
That's correct.
He came up to Massachusetts a few months ago to be a guest speaker in my class at Emerson. And I was happy to coordinate that with his scheduling, but he said he would have done it anyway just for an excuse to come up to New England and stop by the home of a user of the Rhode Island Apple group, or a former member of that user group. This person had a library of floppy disks to get rid of, and Jason was happy to take it off their hands, so he now has 4,000 plus 5¼ floppy disks with documentation, and he is currently in the process of imaging and scanning all of them and putting them on the Internet Archive as part of the Rhode Island Apple Group crate. So he is preserving all that and making it available. He says he has 2 gigabytes of TIFF scans of the floppy, so he's actually scanning the floppy labels and sleeves so you can see exactly what the original physical disk looked like. And then he has, of course, all the disk images themselves. And it is quite the exhaustive undertaking.
So how long do you think that's going to take? That seems like a tremendous effort.
Yeah, for somebody like me, it would probably take the better part of a year or more. I'd say Jason will have this done by the end of the month.
You're kidding.
Well, I think that might be different standards and processes, because I know that all of us, the two of you, me, Jason Scott, we all love metadata. As Jason said, metadata is a love note to the future. But also, my preferred approach is to have the complete package done and then make it available. Whereas I think what Jason does is he throws everything up on the internet and says we can sort it and organize it later. Our immediate priority is to capture it and make it available. So all this stuff is up there. I don't know that there's really a good sorting or organization scheme or method for these 4,000 disks. That might come later.
So he's actually got all 4,000 scanned already?
I don't know about that, but I think what he's posted so far is the first batch, and that in itself is pretty extensive.
Yeah, he's calling it the Rhode Island Apple Group Crate Number 1, so I assume that there will be more crates.
Yes, I'm sure there will. But, regardless of your approach, and I didn't mean that as a criticism, it's just different strategies for accomplishing the same goal, and I'm glad somebody's undertaking that. It's hard to say exactly what will be on these floppies, if it's anything original, or if it's just different collections of software we've been using and seeing for decades. But, again, that's the thing, is you never know what might be in there. This could be the origin of something new, or something that we're familiar with and we never knew where it came from. So it's pretty cool to get that stuff. And I'm very glad the original owner didn't just say, oh, I haven't used these in decades, I'm just going to dump them.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that even if it's just reconstituted public domain and shareware, I still think that saving these is valuable, because it provides a little snapshot, I guess, of a piece of that, not only of Apple history, but of the Rhode Island Apple user group's history. Because a lot of these, it'll be the same software, but there will be an introductory letter from the club president about what's going on in the club or in the Apple world at the time. And to me, that stuff can be just as fascinating as the software.
Right.
If not more. I mean, those old club newsletters, to some extent, it's the only way to really understand what people were thinking and what was going on back in those days.
Exactly.
I mean, you can talk to people that lived there, but a lot of times they forgot or they confuse dates. You just can't remember, what was going on 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. This first Apple crate disk image set contains 145 images. So he's got quite a few to go.
Yes. And is he recruiting anybody to help him, or is he just, since there's only one copy of the floppies, I guess he really can't distribute this?
Yeah, I don't know that I don't know if he's going to send that around, but I'm sure he will be enlisting people to help with the metadata.
Cool.
Yeah, who's going to sign up for 1,000 floppies?
I would do 100. In fact, I have done 100 for other friends who have come by with old floppy disks that they were trying to preserve. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't. But yeah, 1,000 would be exhaustive for me. He's using the FC5025, mm-hmm. and I have ADT Pro, and both methods are acceptable, but I think he probably has experimented with more processes than I have and knows what the best one is, and I'm just using what I got.
Well, the FC5025 works. It's a very quick process, and it doesn't require the same level of bit capture that, say, a protected game would need, where you would have to go with something like the what's that other board that's real popular right now?
Kyroflux?
Yeah, you don't need the Cryoflux for something like this. So that should just about wrap up our Jason Scott news segment for the month.
And in fact, I think that can probably wrap up our show. We do have 2 items on the eBay list, but they're just things I threw on there. And we already talked about the Apple II, the original Apple II that sold on eBay in the news section. The eBay items I was going to mention were Oregon Trail and a Darth Vader Bell and Howl, but there aren't necessarily anything original or unusual about those that we haven't talked about before. So if, seeing as how we've voluminously expanded this show with discussion of the Apple-1, I'm willing to cut back and balance it out and try to keep it under, 5 hours.
I'm happy with that. I will make a quick note here. The Bell and Howl Darth Vader Apple II does have that black multimedia pack thing that goes on the back, and which is typically not included with the auctions. So if you're looking for that, it looks like he's asking $800 for it. 3 offers have been made, and he's turned them all down. So maybe that's a little bit more than you want to pay for this, since
Interesting. Cool.
But yeah, other than that, I think we could wrap it up.
Excellent. Well, Mike Willegal, you have been to VCF Southeast recently. You're not going to KansasFest. Do you have any new projects coming up that you want to share with our audience?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've got too many things in the works right now. I'm still working on peripherals and Selby stuff, and I am also working on a revised Rev Zero reproduction motherboard, which I hope to get out sometime, maybe by fall. And I got more work than time, like everybody.
Oh yeah, I hear you. Now, people who are interested in your products and your developments, how can they find out more? Can they like you on Facebook, follow you on Twitter, subscribe to your RSS feed?
The best way is to go to www.willegal.net, and the way you spell that is Willegal. Mm-hmm. And there you can find my blog, and you can also send me an email at mike@willegal.net if you're interested in things.
Excellent.
So you actually, you pronounce it Willegal, is that right?
I don't care how you say it.
Because I was going to say, I think I've been mispronouncing it the entire show.
Yeah, we've always said Willegal.
Other people say it that way. I don't get nervous about that stuff.
Well, that's very generous of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Who knows how you pronounce? I mean, the history of my name goes back to World War I, when all my grandfathers changed their names because they were of German descent.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
So anyway.
Oh, call you whatever you want. Just don't call you late for dinner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, it's been fabulous having you on the show. I know that even though you don't live too far from me in Massachusetts, we haven't crossed paths all that often, and I hope that, we don't have to travel all the way to Kansas City to see each other.
Absolutely, Ken, and I hope I'm not depressing your ratings too much by joining you.
Trust me, there's nowhere to go but up. Cool. Well, thank you, Mike, and we look forward to hearing about your future products and seeing you in the Apple II community.
Sure. Very happy to join you guys, and this was fun.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
This has been the Open Apple Podcast. Find more episodes, read our blog, or send feedback by visiting us on the web at www.open-apple.net.
Speaking of Jesus, Jason Scott has the...
No. Bad transition. Bad.